much pre-work do you do before writing? That's a question somebody asked yesterday, and it's kind of a good question. Um, I I think my answer to that is a simple one. But first, let me go back and like answer that by saying I used to be absolutely terrible about writing anything, especially if I'm world building like a fantasy novel. It would take me like forever because I would want to get all of the details figured out. I remember one night I had to just like stay up for like hours until like 3 or 4 in the morning, because I wanted to write down every single note and idea that was going to happen in a particular novel. And I didn't want to lose, of course, any of these ideas, and I wanted to get everything figured out so that I wouldn't get lost and stuff like that. And when you're world building, you can just get in this trap of needing to figure out everything. And then what happens is, at least for me, I get into a danger of having figured out so many details, I don't know what I need to do to actually write a story because there is now so much that needs to be communicated. So I found one answer that helps me actually get moving, like take one step right in front of the other. The actual, like a mental trick or whatever, to actually get things out on the page. And you might already guess this. This might be something you're already doing. But for me, if I'm trying to start that habit and I'm a compulsive world builder and I've got like wikis that I'm building out and documents and notes everywhere, um, I try to figure out this one thing. What is the, in taking a specific character, how do I say this? What do they need to know to get through this specific scene? So, as I mentioned in the previous video, like yesterday, um, in writing this novel, I've given myself a challenge to only communicate the world building that somebody is able to experience and learn from somebody else. So that means no info dumping, no communicating of like, in the beginning there were these great histories. There's kind of no sort of Game of Thrones meta history of stuff. If somebody doesn't tell something to somebody else about a piece of the world or how the mechanics of something works, or if the character doesn't discover it themselves, then they don't communicate it. So what that then means is I can get into writing a story scene without fully knowing everything. Um, and that actually can be comforting. For example, opening scene in my novel, I have this character um, take a photograph of something in like a museum. And as I'm writing the scene, I'm realizing what might have happened like 15 minutes before she did that thing. Could somebody have, like in a heist, replaced it 15 minutes before she arrives, and she just shows up and assumes, oh, it's always been this way, and then her story continues. So I could write another story at some point that ends right as her story begins. I don't need to know all of that right now, but that's cool to sort of bookmark. And frankly, that thing that she's actually interacting with, I don't exactly know how it works or why, but it's pretty central to the story. It's kind of a MacGuffin sort of thing. I don't need to have everything figured out because she is not going to know what it means or what it does. So I don't have to figure everything out. Um, the only thing I do have to know is what does she think it is? And then what happens in the scene? Now, obviously, if you're doing your world building, you're trying to establish limits and so on. And this is one thing to decide what makes it and what doesn't and how people interact with the world. And I really like Brandon Sanderson's take on magic, where he's trying to ride that line between magic that can feel magical, it can do anything, versus a, like a D&D rule-based system. And he made, I think, an excellent point that if you don't know all the rules, it can feel like a magical sort of exciting sort of thing, and you don't exactly know what happens next, and you preserve some of that magical feeling of having a magic system. But if you do have the rules, then you can build a sense of intentionality and consistency into your story. Um, Otherwise, you can run the risk of like when a character gets into a very dangerous and dark place, you can just like pull a rabbit out of your hat because your magic system allows like anything to happen. As opposed to in the real world where we live, you have to learn the rules of the road to then know when and how to apply them, or when to ignore them, um, and when you can bend them, right? And until you get in specific situations, you might have to change the rules or apply the rules differently. Same thing with like a magic system. And so I'll do the same thing with crafting a scene. So in doing pre-work, I'll have like Google Keep. It's like my favorite tool, and I'll be spamming notes and ideas and thoughts in there. And then when it comes time to sit down and write, um, all of that might be floating around. And what I'd probably need to do is like take a morning and go through and organize stuff, organize it into um, like here's the magic system, here's the world locations, maybe generate a little bit of art for it, or find a nice picture that makes it feel concrete in my mind. Take a moment to literally just look at that and meditate on what are the opportunities that could happen in this, and then make a list of those. But then when it comes to the actual story that you want to tell, part of the challenge is identifying everything that does not need to be in there. And the only way that I'm finding to make that work is to ground myself in who my actual character is. So in my case, her name's Freya. What does she want? What does she not want? You know, I'm trying to uncover her motivations. I've intuited who she is and the adventure she needs to go on. And there's all this extra stuff that happens in this world, but I'm not going to communicate it. Maybe if you're like a fantasy writer, probably like me, we're always thinking about writing things in trilogies. For me, I'm allowing myself, maybe if this first book goes well, maybe I'm going to write 9 books. I have no idea, and I'm not going to promise myself that. But that takes some pressure off of me needing to answer and solve everything in my current novel. I can allow the character to just discover and make mistakes about the stuff that she does learn. So, in terms of how much pre work, I have a vague sense or general sense of here's what I want to write. Um, and then just start and just try, and I'll usually try to incorporate like 3 senses. Of course, what do they see, what do they hear, what is she feeling? Maybe if I can get some taste in there, that always helps. um, I know there are some people who will need to like write out all of the story beats, so that you don't get lost, and then that way you clearly meet a goal. I don't work that way. I will plot out the scenes so that I know where it goes. But then when I get into writing a scene, that's when I'm a lot freer with how I go through stuff. Um, I can't block out an entire scene, because then I find I lose a little bit of the magic of actually getting into a moment. And this is what writing is like. It's like you're in a play, you're play acting, right? You're getting into somebody else's head and you're pretending to be them. It's like an active meditation sort of thing. And until you actually get into the scene and into the moment, you don't fully know how this character is going to react. Or you might sort of write your first draft and then realize it's not enough. There's not enough of her in it. Maybe I was writing a scene and trying to make a particular goal happen that I wanted. Now because I've written something, I can go back and edit it again, and I can try to get more into my character's head and my character's wants and motivations. Um, and effectively push back on the scene, or be thinking of other things and like throw red herrings in, right? um, so I don't know, is that helpful? It does that exactly. I don't know if that even answers your question, so go ahead, please sound off, let me know in the comments.